Good evening. My name's Dr. P, and this talk is called Interview Like a Rock Star. I'm the founder, president, and head coach of Crimson Coaching, which provides test prep, academic tutoring, college consulting, and also interview prep for students worldwide. So I am a former high school teacher who opened Crimson Coaching in 2014 to be able to work one-on-one with students and to really work with whole families in order to really help students thrive. A lot of times people ask me, why did you name your company Crimson Coaching? As you can see from the little dome at the top of this building, which is where I lived when I was an undergraduate at Harvard, and the color of Harvard is crimson. That is why that's the crimson part. And then the coaching part is because I really try to engage with students' emotional well-being and help them to achieve their fullest potential, whatever that may be for them. I developed this talk because I know that interviewing is something that strikes fear into the heart of a lot of teenagers, especially since the pandemic. It's been well documented that lots of students, unfortunately, are not always super comfortable with the face-to-face interaction with adults. And hopefully, this talk will give them some pointers on what to say and how to say it so that they can help get into the college of their dreams. As a historian, I always like to share my sources with people. The doctor and Dr. P comes from a PhD in history, and so I'll give you a little bit of background about where the sources are coming from. So I did not, as a student, I did not have any advice other than my New York City police officer dad yelling at me as I went out the door on my way to interview for Harvard as a 16-year-old. Dominique, sell yourself. And in general, that's really good advice. But I think that students need a little bit more detail, and hopefully that's what I'm going to give you today. I will also say that probably my knowledge of teenagers from 5 years teaching at Horace Mann School in Riverdale, New York, as well as teaching at Scarsdale High School in Westchester, and other high schools around the tri-state area, that my sort of deep knowledge of the teenage brain as a high school teacher for 10 years is one of the things that informs this talk. But of course, the bulk of the experience and background that I bring to this talk is my time as head coach of Crimson Coaching, which again, I've been operating since 2014. During this time, I've helped students get accepted to schools like Princeton, Stanford, as well as my alma mater, Harvard, as well as other schools where students need to interview. I recently had a student get his congressperson's nomination for the U.S. Naval Academy, for example, and of course, he needed to interview with the congressperson. I also like to stay abreast of the latest research in the field of college admissions, and I'm happy to share with you at the end of this talk if you'd like some of those books. So for tonight's agenda, I will be speaking, tonight is actually the first time I am giving this talk, so I'm not exactly sure how long it's going to run. Usually I try to get my talks to stay around 30 to 40 minutes. For you live in the audience, you can feel free at any point to pop your questions into the chat, and I will try to answer them as I talk. Otherwise, we can talk about it at the Q&A at the end. And if you are watching this on YouTube after this talk was delivered live, you can always feel free to email me, and I'll share my email address at the very end. So let's just talk a little bit first about why interviews are important in the first place. And we'll go to the Senior Associate Director of Admissions from Georgetown University, Melissa Costanzi, who said that many times we learn things in interviews that we wouldn't have learned from anywhere else in the application. We think a really important part of holistic admissions is to give the applicant the opportunity to tell his or her story. And I bolded those two words, holistic admissions, because Georgetown, like many other universities that require an interview, really tried to look at the whole person, not just, grades or not just an SAT score. And as we'll talk about in a second, especially for students for whom, maybe they don't have a perfect SAT score or a perfect 4.0, an interview is a really nice way to bolster your application. So there are very few colleges that actually require interviews. Among them are all of the Ivy League colleges except for Cornell, as well as Duke, Emory, Bowdoin, University of Chicago, MIT, and Georgetown. Other colleges offer but don't require interviews, and they include Stanford, Tufts, Vanderbilt, and Vassar. And if you are interested in getting a full list of colleges that do require interviews, feel free to go to my blog at crimsoncoaching.com/blog. And today, or actually, I think it might have been a few days ago when I posted an article on interviewing, go and read that article. And there's a link in there for that'll take you to a list of the colleges that require interviews. So how and when do interviews happen? Well, for schools that require them, you'll often be contacted after you submit your application. So at this point in the cycle, if you applied regular in January, it might be a little early. But then again, by mid-February, you should be hearing. So if you haven't, I would reach out to the school. For schools that offer but don't require the interviews, definitely reach out to the admissions office so that you can let them know that you would like an interview. And if you apply early, if you're a junior and watching this for next year, if you apply in the fall for, sometime in November, your interview will usually happen sometime in December. If you're applying in January, usually that interview will happen sometime in February or March. I'm a big believer that if you're given the option to interview, you should interview. Um, an interview not only demonstrates your interest in the school, which may boost your chances of that school admitting you, but it also gives you opportunity to learn something about that school. And you become more of a person to that school, not just statistics on a page. So what happens during an interview? I feel like there's an awful lot of mystery surrounding this, because after all, as adults, most of us have interviewed for more than one job, and so we're kind of familiar with it. Although I should say that most adults also find the prospect of going for an interview, especially for a job they really, really want, incredibly intimidating. So it's no wonder that students who have probably never interviewed for a job or very seldom interviewed for a job get really quite nervous when they have to confront the prospect of interviewing for a college that they really, really want to get into. So Eric Peterson, the chief enrollment officer at Evergreen State College in Washington State, has said that a good interview is going to be a conversation. Let the conversation flow back and forth. Well, how do you do that? I mean, especially if you're nervous. Well, I'm a big believer that good conversations involve speaking, listening, and asking questions. And so, one way to have that great conversation, that great interview, is by coming prepared to do all three of those things. So, Some colleges will ask about your past. Now, your past can really be a whole bunch of different things. Maybe they're going to ask about your past academics, maybe about your past extracurriculars, but they could also ask about your favorite books, your favorite passions. If you read my blog post from last week, you'll see I really, there are, if you Google like most common interview questions, you'll get some blog posts out there that give you like 15 questions that you absolutely must answer or know the answers to, or something like that. I find that very overwhelming because Murphy's Law means that if you prepare exactly for one question or 15 questions, it's the 16th thing that you didn't prepare for that they're going to ask you about. So I really encourage students to prepare responses in one of three buckets, okay? So the first bucket is about your past, everything about your past. You might want to look at your personal statement for the Common App, your activities list, books that you read in school, books that you read out of school, hobbies that you have outside of school. And for all of these things, be able to think about one or two anecdotes that really illustrate your passion, or if it's a change from maybe saying not loving physics to being okay with physics, be able to have some anecdotes that show your evolution in that specific thing. And by anecdote, I mean an incident that happened to you that will paint a picture in your interviewer's mind. So it's a lot. For example, I as a student, I loved art. I loved making art. But it's one thing to say, I love art, which, okay, but they're gonna have to take my word for it. It's another thing that for my Harvard interview, not only did I bring my whole portfolio with all of my paintings and drawings that were good enough to show somebody during my interview, but I also was able to talk about how I would routinely take the Long Island Railroad by myself as a 14, 15, 16-year-old from Long Island to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, to the Museum of Modern Art, to the Whitney. And I spoke about all of the really amazing art exhibits that I had seen in the past couple of years. Again, these things show the interviewer my passion. I'm not telling the reader about my passion or the interviewer about my passion. The reason I said reader is because the same thing that your English teacher might be telling you about your college essay, show, don't tell. You want to follow that same exact advice for the interview. Other colleges or other interviewers might also ask about your future goal. So, kind of, if the past was the first bucket of things you need to prepare anecdotes about, the future is the next bucket of questions you should be prepared to answer. But specifically, you want to be able to address how college X or how university Y will help you fulfill those future goals. And in so doing, you are going to be able to demonstrate your deep knowledge of the school. How do you figure that out? You have to spend a lot of time on the school's website. Now, I am always shocked as a college essay coach when I get students whose research into the college extends only so far as where the college is and what it looks like. A college could look beautiful, but if it doesn't have the programs that you need to fulfill your dream of, say, becoming a doctor or an orthopedic surgeon, then that might not be the college for you. So you really want to dig deep Look at specific professors in the major that you want to major in. Look at specific courses they teach. Investigate different research centers if you are interested in doing some kind of undergraduate research that may help fulfill your goals. If you're more into working, maybe look at the internship program or the mentorship program that the school offers. But maybe it's a study abroad program. You should go equipped with at least 5 ways, I think, that that college specifically will help you fulfill your professional goals and or your personal goals. And by personal goals, I mean everybody has something outside of school that they might like to learn. So for example, I was not a college athlete by any stretch of the imagination, but I always wanted to row crew. And Harvard has an intramural crew team that I was able to join. I always wanted to take a dance class. They have a dance studio there. So personal and professional goals, think about them and then do your research on the website to be able to go in with notes. And it is totally okay for you to go in, and I'm going to talk about things that you should go into the interview with. It is totally okay to go in with like a little note, or maybe you want to do note cards on, maybe you have past and then you write down your anecdotes, future. Maybe then you write down your future goals and how the college will fulfill them. These are important things to prepare before your interview. The last bucket that you should prepare in order to go into the interview with are personal questions for the interviewer about the school. By personal questions, I do not mean how many dates did you have with girls or guys while you were at college? No, not that kind of personal. But I mean information that is not readily available on the school's website. So, for example, if you want an internship or a mentor, and you know that that college offers those programs, ask your interviewer, did you have a mentor? How was that person able to shape your years after college? Did you do an internship? Did you find that internship relevant to your future profession? So you're asking about their personal take on those future goals maybe that you have so that you can get the inside information. These will show that you're interested in your interviewer, and after all, most people, again, in the give and take, here's where you're going to ask and also listen to the response. You're going to now stop the speaking so much. That is a way that the interviewer can assess your not only your interest but also your maturity. Once again, I recommend, oops, I forgot the little dot in between Crimson Coaching and Calm, but you can see the blog post that I recently posted for a much more in-depth look at these 3 buckets of questions that you should be prepared to answer and ask on your college interview. So likewise, is there anything you should not ask? Definitely. Um, you don't want to ask your chances of earning admission. Most likely, that person interviewing you is not going to be able to tell you that. Also, it's not really an appropriate time to ask that. You don't want to ask too many non-academic questions. So it's okay to ask about, maybe a different extracurricular question. Again, something that can't easily be found on the website. But you don't want to be asking your interviewer, how many parties did you go to? What's the party scene like? They might not get the sense that you're super serious about the academic pursuits at the school. You don't really want to ask also about rankings of the school's departments or what's the best department in the school. Generally, the interviewer is going to be very proud of all the departments. And again, if rankings matter to you, this is something that you yourself can research online before you get to your interview. And overall, I just want to again reiterate the importance of not asking questions that can be easily answered by a simple website search. This is going to give your interviewer the impression that you really didn't do your homework, and then give the impression that you're not really serious about the school. Oh, um, this is I'm gonna full disclosure, this is not from any research that I found. This is just my own personal opinion. I think if you are a student who needs tutoring services or mental health services or thinks you might in the future, and to be honest, every student might need either of those things at some point in the future. I think those things should be researched before you get to your interview. I don't think you should ask about them on your interview. It is totally legitimate for students and parents to want to know about the extent of tutoring and services and mental health services and facilities on campus. But I worry that asking about it during an interview may frankly raise a red flag, and that may be something that you'd like to avoid. So, like everything, practice makes perfect, or at least progress. I definitely think you should practice for interviews. And if you can't do that with a professional coach like me, you could do that with another adult, with a friend. So, what are some things that you could do in order to prepare for that interview or to practice for it? Well, as I mentioned, read over your whole application and develop some really powerful anecdotes to go along with each activity you discuss. This is important. The young man that I was talking about that did get his congressperson's nomination for the U.S. Naval Academy mentioned he did 2 interview prep sessions with me of 50 minutes each. And he's a very bright kid, took all, AP courses, did very well on his SAT. I was also his SAT coach, so he's a very bright young man. But he's not a person who is very talkative. And so he gave kind of like one sentence answers to a lot of my questions. That makes it really difficult for a conversation, a give and take, a flow back and forth to happen. And so for every example you give or everything you say, try to give an anecdote or an example that goes with it. Remember the metaphor of painting a picture in your interviewer's mind of you engaged on the lacrosse field, for example, or of you winning the ethics bowl, or on the stage singing the lead in the musical. All of those all of those anecdotes will help paint a picture. It's great. Remember when I talked about the notes before? Whoops. It's great to go in with notes. I just wouldn't memorize. So in the same way that I actually have notes for myself written on my PowerPoint for you tonight so that it reminds me of where I want to go, I don't have every single word memorized, right? That would be really boring. It wouldn't be a give and take or a conversation if I had every single word planned out. So try not to memorize answers. If you're asked a question that you didn't prepare for, just try to use something else in that bucket, the past, the future, questions, the third bucket, questions for the interviewer. Try to use details from that bucket, from something else that you prepared for in that bucket. And think about politicians. So many times they deflect. They ask about one thing and then pretty soon they're bouncing off in a different direction, the direction they want to go. So keep that in mind when you go to your interview. I also recommend a couple of books. Amy Cuddy has one of probably the top most watched TED Talks of all time, and you can just Google Amy Cuddy TED Talk, and she will talk about her research while she was, I believe, a professor at Harvard Business School, on the ability of a stance or a variety of stances to help imbue us with a certain frame of mind. And so one of the classic ones is standing with arms akimbo. So your arms are sort of bent, your hands are on your hips, your legs are out like this, and you're sort of like making your chest wide. By spreading your body out, that's sort of a very, I don't want to use the word aggressive, but it's an assertive posture, right? Um, she did research that showed that standing like that, I forget exactly for how long, if you need to stand like that for 30 seconds or 2 minutes or what it is, but that then increases people's self-esteem. So there's lots of, pop culture references to this. I remember seeing about 10 years ago on Grey's Anatomy, two of the doctors standing like that in the restroom before they had to either do an interview or some procedure. But you may want to try to do that before your practice. You may also want to think about reading James Story's The Art of the Interview. But most of all, I would have your practice interviewer help you figure out how to spin your weaknesses and to highlight your strengths. So, so many times people say, well, what's your greatest weakness? Well, I would always say in an interview for a job, I'm a perfectionist. Now, why is this a weakness? Well, perfectionists never feel like their work is ever done, blah, 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 never satisfied with their own work. But the reason I picked this weakness is because it's also can be viewed as a real strength to an employer. What employer wouldn't want a perfectionist as, as an employee? I would say for a college, though, you might want to steer clear of that because I think colleges are much more attuned to the fact that perfectionist students can actually drive themselves into the ground by being too perfectionist. So actually, I call myself a recovering perfectionist, and I'm okay if I have mistakes and things. But be able to highlight those strengths and quickly spin off of your weaknesses to your strengths. So these are just a couple of quotes from alumni interviewers at various schools. Jonathan Cohen at MIT said the most important thing is someone who's genuine. I can hear that you're feeding me lines. So again, try not to memorize your notes. And Ray Esposito, who interviews for Georgetown, said the more you talk about yourself, the easier it is for the interviewer to write a meaningful report. And know that when you're interviewing with an alumnus, which, by the way, when schools require interviews, those interviewers are almost always conducted by alumni because, tens of thousands of students every year apply to these schools. There's no way that the admissions office could conduct all of those interviews. So alumni like me are interviewing people for Harvard. I can't interview people for Harvard because of the job I have, but you get the point. And so they all write reports after the interview. And so it's a lot easier for them when you actually speak. So let's just talk a little bit about the way to look and certain things that you should do, shouldn't do for interviews, decorum. So, you don't have to wear a three-piece suit, but, I definitely wouldn't wear ripped jeans and a t-shirt. Um, I recommend getting a watch and getting there early. And the reason why I don't recommend using the clock on your phone will be evident in a moment. I recommend bringing a pen and paper. You might want to write things down as you go, but you also might want to have your notes on questions that you want to ask the interviewer. And you also want to maybe bring copies of your application for your interviewer to take a look at. Mom and dad can drop you off, but don't have mom and dad walk in with you. You want to be perceived as an adult. Do not check your cell phone or look at your watch during the interview. And the best way not to look at your cell phone is to not have your cell phone with you. When you don't have your cell phone with you, you need a watch in order to be on time. So that's why I recommend the watch. The cell phone, once you've verified the location, you've gotten there with the map on your phone, no reason why you can't leave it in the car. Or, look, if you're in the city, perhaps turn it off and put it in your book bag. Don't have it out on the table with you, okay? You definitely want to try to make eye contact with your interviewer. I realize that many students have difficulty with making eye contact. However, I do really believe that that is a way to foster a connection with somebody. So I also really recommend that you try to do that. And again, you might want to try deep breathing to calm yourself down if you're anxious. And by the way, on my website, I have an MP3 that you can check out that has it's really for test taking and anti-test anxiety, but you could certainly modify it yourself if you'd like to use it for pre-interview. In fact, that's an idea. Maybe I'll do one for an interview and think about doing the Amy Cuddy stance before. So after the interview, it's not just one and done. There's some things that you should do after the interview as well to make sure that the whole experience helps you get accepted to that college. I'm a big believer in handwritten thank you notes. I get that, especially if your interview occurs over Zoom, you may not know the interviewer's physical location, in which case, at the very least, send them an email. But I might also just email them and say, could I have your address? I'd like to send you a note. I don't recommend just saying thanks. I recommend mentioning something really specific from the interview. So, for example, if you, like for me, I talked about going to art museums, and my interviewer might have talked about something about art. I would have mentioned what he said about art in my note, and I would reiterate interest in the school. If you think your interview went poorly, don't panic. Only 5.5% of the colleges surveyed by the National Association of College Advising Counselors said that the interview was of considerable importance. And those are probably those schools that we mentioned that require the interview. If you had an interview or not, and this is not quite in the vein of interviews, but I recommend if you're deferred from a school, if you applied early and you were deferred, I recommend sending also to the school a letter of continued interest. At some point in the near future, I'm going to be writing a blog post and a monthly newsletter about the letter of continued interest, which many more students I find, especially this year, many more students have been writing. So feel free to sign up for my monthly newsletter. At the homepage of crimsoncoaching.com, you'll see a black banner running across the top that says sign up for the monthly Desk to Nest newsletter. If you click there, it'll take you to a form where you can sign up for that newsletter. So we're kind of drawing down now. If you'd like to learn more, the best way to do that is by signing up for that newsletter I just described at the homepage of crimsoncoaching.com up at the top. You can also like Crimson Coaching on Facebook. I do post when I'm about to give webinars, but I will be honest, I'm not always super in advance with that. So for instance, I was posting about tonight's talk a half hour before the talk. So you may not learn about it super in advance. So again, the best way to do it is get that newsletter, which will come to your inbox the first of every month, thereabouts. You could also subscribe to my YouTube at youtube.com/Crimson Coaching. And that's where recorded videos like this, if you're watching as a video, oftentimes I record webinars and post them, or I might post shorter clips to YouTube later on so that people can watch later on. So when you subscribe, you not only help my channel to grow, but you also get notified every time that I post a new video there. So if you'd like to email me, I also have a handout of tonight's talk with highlights, sort of top tips. Feel free to email me at info@crimsoncoaching.com. Here's my website again, crimsoncoaching.com. That's my phone, but I'll admit email is probably a better way to get in touch with me because if I'm with a student, I'm not picking up my phone. So I do offer private sessions with students. I will do limited in-person work with students on Long Island, and I meet with students via Zoom worldwide. And those are some of my sources that I used. This great Canva template, Rockstar template, was from Canva, and those are some of the other places that I got some of the sources from. So thank you so much for attending. And this was a lot of fun, this presentation to do. I hope you learned a lot. We don't have a ton of people in the audience tonight, but I do just want to open it up to questions from them. Any questions? All right, well, if there's no questions, I just want to thank you once again for coming. And I am giving lots of webinars this and in-person talks later. But in February, March, I'm giving lots of webinars, both alone as well as with other professionals, especially finance professionals. So if you go to my website, crimsoncoaching.com, and you click on classes and workshops, you will see all the webinars I'm giving. The next time I'll be back for Orangeburg Library is exactly 1 month from today, March 8th. And let's see what I'm talking about. I'm talking about making the most of college tours before, during, and after your trip. And I have a whole bunch of different ones coming up in the next couple of months, as well as beginning of April. And then starting the end of April, if you happen to know people on Long Island or you're on Long Island, I'll be giving talks in person here. So once again, thanks so much for coming, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.